we still have the spring snow melt and the flooding season really just gearing up and coming up on us.
Midwest farmers worry that the worst flooding they've ever seen could actually happen again. The latest from a submerged farm country. Not optimistic, but hopeful. The U.S. Trade Ambassador's sentiment ahead of more meetings with China.
I walk door to door in the muck.
Fatigued and overwhelmed. The relief efforts and advice to move forward after the storm. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us on Market Day Report. I'm Christina Loren. Midwest devastation could increase with floods expected in South Dakota and more rains possible in parts of Nebraska and Iowa this week. RFD-TV's Janet Atkinson reports from Peru, Nebraska, where floodwaters still cover much of the city.
The flood impact is far-reaching from state to state and from the bottoms to the hills. The small community of Peru, Nebraska, about an hour south of Omaha, knows the challenge all too well. This week, a drive down Main Street offers a lakefront view, but it's actually floodwater from the mighty Mo that broke through a levee that's never been breached before. While the community itself overlooks the vast landscape, the local water treatment plant doesn't.
There's a lot of things. This flood has really detrimented this area. The breaches in the levee got up into the town's water supply. So our water treatment plant for our little small community is offline. Same way with the sewer systems. They're trucking water in right now and refill the water tower for daily use.
The hilltop town will have to apply through FEMA for federal grants to get the system back online.
They have to get a hazmat crew into the water treatment plant because of the chemicals that were there in there, and they can't do anything, of course, until the water recedes, and then they have to go in there and assess the damage to, the wells, the pumps, and all that stuff.
Brett Adams farms below the community, which his farm is basically underwater. He serves on the area's drainage and levee board, which helps protect the city's water supply and sewer system. And like other towns along the river basin, it's going to be a long, slow process.
Even though the water may be receding a few feet now, we still have the spring snow melt and the flooding season really just gearing up and coming up on us. So, this could turn around and happen again. We could get, another rush of water with the melt in this May and June, which is kind of the normal, high river time for us.
So far, both Nebraska and 56 counties in Iowa have been granted expedited disaster declaration, which triggers the release of federal funds that will help impacted communities through the rebuilding and recovery process. On the road in Nebraska, I'm Janet Atkinson, RFD-TV News.
Thank you, Janet. And the National Weather Service predicts as much as 3 inches of rain in eastern Nebraska and western Iowa later this week. Officials say it could aggravate the Missouri River flooding. Archer's Daniels Midland expects losses totaling $50 to $60 million due to severe weather disruptions. The floods idled its corn processing complex in Columbus, and it's still running at reduced rates. High waters also impacted transportation, with barge and port activities slowed down. And rail lines were also disrupted. Here's a look at BNSF rail outages. The rail line says crews are working to restore service as quickly as possible. Now, some traffic is being rerouted, but shipments destined for locations in the region will continue to experience delays. Union Pacific says floods caused significant damage to its rail network. Numerous subdivisions and corridors continue to be out of service due to track washouts. Officials say there is very limited reroute capability. Congress is back to work already, trying to get rural flood victims the help that they need. RFD-TV's Sarah Mock is live in our Washington, D.C. studios for an update on their efforts. Sarah?
Well, good morning, Christina. We are watching closely as folks take to the Senate floor to discuss a disaster relief bill actually originally intended for victims of 2018 disasters, those fires, those hurricanes, tornadoes even. And we hear from leaders that bill will be expanded to include victims of the Midwest flooding. Now, of course, one of the leaders we've been watching has been Chuck Grassley of Iowa. He took to the Senate floor last night to kind of really bring attention to some of these issues, particularly in Iowa, and bring some national focus to what has really taken a back seat here in Washington in the last few days.
Is $214 million. Damages to homes, $481 million. Levee repair estimates, $525 million.
Now, we talked to Senator Grassley just a little bit earlier this morning, and he really emphasized that those numbers are very rough and they're estimated as of right now. He does expect them to rise. We're hearing figures as high as $3 billion in flood damage across the states that have been affected so far. And of course, we do expect the number of affected states and areas to grow in the coming weeks. This disaster assistance bill has already been passed in the House, so we expect a possible quick movement. And one of the things he really emphasized is that FEMA will be offering indemnity payments for folks who had stored grain damaged or destroyed in the flood. That's one of the things he said, yes, that will be included in the bill for folks affected by these floods.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And we will be coming back to RFD-TV's Washington Bureau as we move into the noon hour. There's a full list of relief efforts on our website for Midwest farmers and ranchers. Visit RFD-TV.com for places where you can donate, volunteer opportunities, and you'll also find available resources. It's all organized by state. Just head to RFD-TV.com for more information. A Bloomberg report predicts that more U.S. pork will go to China. They say that they could buy as much as 300,000 metric tons in 2019. Now, Allendale reports this is actually disappointing considering domestic losses from African swine fever. The Allendale Advisory Report estimated increases of an extra $728 million to $1.5 billion this year, and they considered their export increase to be quite conservative. The 300,000 estimate would still be about 80% more than Chinese pork purchases from the U.S. in 2017. The head of trade hopes, but he's not necessarily hopeful regarding China. Ambassador Robert Lighthizer jokingly told NPR he's not particularly optimistic when it comes to China in an interview on Monday. Now, Lighthizer will head to China later this week to continue trade negotiations. He says progress has been made on intellectual property rights and forced technology transfer. Michigan producers convene in Washington this week as Farm Bureau members lobby for resolution to trade issues impacting farmers across the state. Joining us now is Michigan Farm Bureau President Carl Bednarski. Thanks so much for joining us, Carl. So you and your members are in Washington. Talk about what your main objective is while you're there.
Well, thank you for letting me be able to come on and speak to you today here. Yes, we have 114 members from Michigan in D.C. here today, and we're looking at some of the priorities that Michigan has, and one of those at the forefront is the USMCA trade agreement. And we're going to be working the hill hard to make our members of Congress understand the importance of this trade agreement to Michigan.
You know, talk about how Michigan farmers and ranchers are coping with the trade issues. It's not just the USMCA. We also, as you know, have big trade negotiations still happening with China.
Well, you're absolutely right. And when we take a look at the diversity of Michigan being the second most diverse state behind California, we have a number of commodities that are affected by trade. And we need to get those commodities out of our state and into the other countries out there. So when we take a look at not only USMCA, but take a look at the China, the EU, and there's so many other countries out there that rely on our products, and we rely on getting those products out into the marketplace.
What would you say is your main message to leaders in Washington this week?
The main message from Michigan would be, number one, let's get the USMCA pushed over the finish line. There's a lot of great things in that agreement there that affects agriculture throughout this country. But when we take a look at Michigan in particular, Canada is our next door neighbor. There was a tremendous amount of trade that goes back and forth across that border, and we need to be able to keep that border open and have it as effective as we can for trade that both countries rely on. And it's just that Mexico, too, is a huge consumer of products from the U.S., and we need to be aware of that and try to do our best in getting a trade agreement that's fair to everyone.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule in Washington to meet with us today. Michigan Farm Bureau President Carl Bednarski, thank you so much for joining us. Stay with us. Meteorologist Tim Ross has your forecast at 10 after the hour.